This week on MCrider, we're going to talk about how these two things, your hands, can make you a better rider. We'll give you some tips on using the clutch, on how to properly go to the clutch, release the clutch, and squeeze in the clutch. We'll talk about how to use the throttle and the front brake over here. Some proper techniques on using your two hands on a motorcycle to make you a better, smoother rider. And we'll go over to the motorcycle. We'll sit down. We'll look at it over there as we talk about it. So let's talk about the clutch side of the motorcycle. We reach out for the clutch with all four fingers. When we're first starting to ride, that is one of the most difficult things for riders to get a grasp of, because we don't have clutches in a lot of cars, especially in the US anymore. So a clutch is a whole new thing for a lot of riders. One of the biggest pieces of advice I can give for new riders, and in fact, riders of all skill levels, is being smooth with that clutch. So when you got the motorcycle in first gear, slowly, smoothly release that clutch. At some point, the clutch is going to start catching. It's going to pull the motorcycle forward. When that happens, what happens, a lot of riders, motorcycle starts moving forward, they do that. They just let go of the clutch, and either the motorcycle is really jerky whenever they take off, or it causes the motorcycle to stall and they have to restart and start over again. So be smooth with that clutch. Continue releasing that clutch all the way through, even after it starts moving forward, and it's going to make your starts a whole lot smoother. Same thing with bringing it in. You want to be smooth with that clutch. You never want to, just release the clutch like that. You never want to be really quick or abrupt with the clutch. Especially new riders, think about being smooth. So let me show you an exercise where you can work on getting smooth with that clutch. It's an introductory exercise. One of the first things that the riders will do in an MSF class is work on this exercise, and it helps you build that smoothness with the clutch. The only thing that causes some riders to struggle when they're working on the exercise is when they start actually riding and they get to the point where they're ready, to put their feet up on the pegs. Motorcycle's moving forward a little bit, they'll just release the clutch. Remember, you want to be smooth with that clutch when you put your feet up on the pegs so that the motorcycle will continue being smooth as you start out. So let me bring up that exercise and we'll look at that on some ways that you can work on this out on a parking lot. As you watch the exercise, you can hear the RPMs on the engine build as I give the motorcycle just a minimal amount of throttle as I'm slowly releasing the clutch to let the motorcycle pull me forward. Then I'm squeezing in the clutch as I roll back off the throttle and pushing the motorcycle back to the start position with my legs. But smooth and slow is not always the same thing. So when you're out on the road and you're shifting through the gears, you may come out fairly quick on the clutch, but there's a difference between being smooth and being slow, and we want to focus on being smooth. So you want to be smooth with that clutch as you release the clutch. Another common thing that I see with riders is when they're riding and they shift gears, they'll squeeze that clutch all the way in, they'll click up and shift into the next gear, release the clutch, squeeze it all the way in. You don't even have to bring that clutch in all the way. Just bring it to that point where it starts to disengage a little bit. Click up into the next gear or down, whichever way you're going, and then release the clutch. It's going to save you a whole lot of time. It's going to make your shift smoother rather than fully working that clutch through the full path of travel of that clutch lever. If you just bring it to that point where the clutch begins to take power away from the motorcycle, you can click up through the next gear, release that clutch, and be on your way. So you don't have to fully manipulate that clutch on every shift. And that's going to make your shift smoother and quicker as you're going down the road. So let's switch over to the front brake side and let's talk about using the front brake. Again, you want to think about being smooth. If you're abrupt, anytime you're abrupt with any of the controls of the motorcycle, it's going to lead to a bad day. You want to be smooth with those front brakes. So you're squeezing that front brake smoothly. When you're releasing it, you also want to be smooth. You want to avoid those quick, jerky movements. Smooth is always going to be better. You know, a lot of people ask, going to that front brake, do you use one finger? Do you use 4 fingers? Do you use 2 fingers? Well, for me, it kind of depends on what I'm doing. If I'm approaching a corner and I'm going to trail brake into that corner, oftentimes I will just use 2 fingers because I know I'm not going to put a whole lot of pressure on that front brake. I'm just going to put enough pressure on there to get the forks to compress. So I'll use 2 fingers a lot of times in that instance. When I'm practicing emergency braking, though, I'm almost always using all 4 fingers to go to those brakes. This bike is not too bad. Let me see if I can get the camera over there. If you get a whole lot of pressure, you see how that starts pinching on these fingers here. These 2 kind of get trapped under that lever. In fact, I can pull that brake lever far enough back where I begin trapping those 2 fingers. What you're doing when that happens is you're losing some braking power because you've pulled that handle back as far as you can. So there may be other reasons why every time you go to those brakes, you may want to use the front and the rear. I've kind of, trained myself. If I'm trail braking, I'll go here. If I'm emergency braking, I use all 4 fingers, and that's to keep from getting those fingers trapped under that brake lever, because I want to be able to pull that lever back as far as I need to get the motorcycle to a stop. So just like we want to be smooth with the clutch, the front brake, we want to be smooth on our roll-on with the throttle as well. If you're quick on the throttle, we all know what's going to happen there. So you want to be smooth on and off the throttle. So let me bring up an exercise. I'll show you a technique that you can use. You can get out on an empty road or a parking lot, and you can work on smoothly rolling on and off the throttle. It's going to make your riding out on the street a whole lot smoother if you can get this technique down. So let me show you an exercise to work on throttle control, and it will greatly improve your riding.
On this throttle exercise, you'll keep the bike in first gear. You'll roll on the throttle initially, the first 30% of the entire course, and then the last 70% you're slowly rolling off the throttle to become at 0 throttle at the point where you stop the motorcycle. So if you'll watch my wrist and hands, we've got a few more examples of this exercise. Notice how it's almost imperceptible to see my throttle hand move. It's a very subtle movement on the throttle, but it will really help you develop smoothness using the throttle if you practice this technique.
So let's talk about our wrist position when we go to the throttle. Some riders will start with their wrist position really high, and the reason why they do that is because when they roll on the throttle, then their wrist is what they think is in a more comfortable position. But the problem that causes is when they roll off the throttle, their fingers are out of position to go to the front brake. So they either have to readjust their grip to go to the brake, or what is even worse in some instances, they roll on the throttle, they roll off in an attempt to get to the brake, they inadvertently roll back on the throttle to get to the brake, and the motorcycle lurches forward. So if you've ever practiced emergency braking and you've come to a stop, and whenever you went to that front brake, the engine really revved up again, it's probably because your wrist is up high. You see my wrist is up high in this situation. You want to go with your wrist in a flat position, roll on the throttle here. That way when you roll off, your fingers are in the perfect position to reach out for that front brake. And that's because I'm going with a flat wrist to that grip instead of coming in with my wrist elevated. Go to that with a flat wrist. Your fingers will be in a better position once you roll off the throttle to reach for that front brake. Another problem that this causes going up high like this is something called whiskey throttle. So a rider rolls on and they're not good with the clutch yet, so they roll on the throttle, motorcycle jerks, they try to roll off, it jerks again, they roll back on the throttle because every time they pull back, because their wrist is elevated, it causes them to roll on the throttle, where if they had a flatter grip, it doesn't cause that throttle to want to roll whenever they jerk back because of poor technique with the clutch. So one of the first things you always want to work on, get that wrist flat whenever you go to the throttle. You roll on from here. It's going to help you avoid that whiskey throttle, and like we said earlier, it's going to help your fingers get to that front brake. So another thing that you can do to adjust the controls on your motorcycle, on this bike I've got these 2 bolts here. Whenever I loosen those bolts up, this whole thing rotates forward and backwards, and you'll notice that my brake lever is a little bit lower than the throttle. So a lot of times when the person assembles the motorcycle, they'll have both the brake and the clutch up too high, and that in turn makes it harder to get to those controls as well. You want them a little bit lower, a little bit downward angle from the throttle, and on the clutch side, downward angle from that grip to get to the clutch, and that's going to make it easier for your fingers to get to that control. And on most motorcycles, you're going to find, bolts like this that are similar to this that will allow you, once they're loosened up, to rotate this whole assembly and move that down a little bit till it's in a comfortable position for you. I get asked frequently, so I thought I'd go ahead and mention it, what the gloves are that I use when I'm riding and what I used in this video. These are Lee Parks gloves. I'll have a link that'll come up right here where you can look at a pair of these for yourself. You can tell these gloves have been well loved. I've been using them for a few different riding seasons now. I think I've had this particular pair, maybe 4 years now. So they're well used. They've still got some life left in them. These are the best gloves that I've found, as far as comfort wise, especially. They're just a really soft leather, but they are reinforced in the right areas. They offer a little, extra protection here, but they're really comfortable. They're really well-made gloves, and I can highly recommend these. They are a little more expensive than what you'll find some other cheaper gloves, but I've had some cheaper ones that have lasted me a season or two. Like I said, this is my 2nd pair of these. I've had this pair now for, 4 or 5 years. I also have a pair that are winter, they're insulated, and they're gauntlet gloves. They're a little bit taller. In fact, let me go over. I'll grab those. We'll show them to you. So after a little digging around, they were sitting on the gas tank of my Indian Challenger, go figure. So these are the gauntlet gloves that Lee Parks makes as well. These are insulated, so they're a little bit warmer. You can tell these don't get nearly as much use because it doesn't get that cold here in Texas. But these work really good in conjunction with heated grips. I've got heated grips on my bikes. I've had this pair probably 3 or 4 years as well. I like this gauntlet style because I can tuck my jacket up in there and it better protects for wind, so it keeps the wind from getting up in your jacket. Been really happy with these, so if you're looking for a pair of winter gloves, I can highly recommend these as well. They're highly comfortable as well. They're probably not, being totally honest, if you're in a really cold climate, these aren't as warm as some gloves that I've had in the past, but if you're in Texas and most of your low temperatures that you ride in are the, upper 30s or, lower 30s, or you've got heated grips, these are really comfortable and they're good gloves for, I would call, moderate winters. If you're in the Northeast and you still ride when it's really cold, you're probably going to want something different than these. But I really like these in the Texas winters for sure, and especially with the addition of the heated grips. So these are my summer gloves. Wear these all summer long. Been wearing these several years. These are my winter gloves, both from Lee Parks. I'll have a link down below where you can get more information on these gloves if you're looking for a pair for yourself. So I hope this video was helpful for you. Till next week, guys, it's Kevin with MCrider, and I'll see you on the road. See that video on the left of the screen? YouTube hand-selected that video just for you. Click on it, find out why YouTube wants you to watch this MCrider video.